Okay, welcome, guys. I am super excited about this panel today, and hopefully, you all are too. So, before we get started on everything, I want to introduce everybody. I hope that when you see this on Zoom, it's the same order. Right to my immediate right is Kristy Johnson, and she is an award-winning children's author and has ghostwritten over 30 books for entrepreneurs over the years. She's a sought-after developmental editor and transformational book coach, and she recently launched Star Seed Journey Retreats because she can't imagine anything better than being in a beautiful location with beautiful people who want to reconnect with their deepest selves through writing. Wow. That sounds amazing. Where we got Costa Rica. Costa Rica. How's that? Okay. To her right is Jessica Andersen, and she's an editor turned book coach from the USA who moved to France one day in 2010 and never looked back. Since starting her business 4 years ago, she's worked with authors all over the world on dozens of books and is the founder of Brand Book Boot Camp. My gosh, Jessica, say that 3 times fast. She serves entrepreneurs who want to replace their content marketing with a brand book, which will position them as the go-to voice and attract ideal clients. And to her right is Allie Berthiaume. Did I say it right? Yay! I never say it right. You should see, well, you can see how it's spelled right there. She's usually known as Allie B, but published under AY, and is the founder of Right Place, Right Time, a virtual boutique of book coaching and ghostwriting services. She serves leaders, entrepreneurs, and visionaries across North America and Europe in writing their books that will light up their world and ours. She is also an award-winning author of Dear Universe, I Get It Now, Letters on the art and journey of being brave and being me, and the co-author of Do Not Write a Book Until You Read This One, which is a fabulous book, you guys. I did one of the endorsements on it, and the ladies really did a fantastic job. So, you guys, welcome, welcome, welcome. So let's start today with audience building. So I think one of the big things that happens is we get into people say, okay, I want to write a book, but they don't really get into understanding their audience. So who wants to start with this? Let's maybe talk about what you do to get people really invested and identifying that audience clearly.
I'd like to kick us off, if that's okay. The first thing that I actually tell my author clients to do is to announce it on social media. And that is really scary for some people. And it's where most people like give me pushback from the get-go. But I do it on purpose because I know it's going to challenge them. And if they're really, really like sort of digging in and not wanting to do that, I say, okay, instead of saying like I'm going to write this book, say I'm thinking about writing this book. It offers them a little bit of leeway, but the point of all this is to start a discussion with any audience that they have already established, just to start putting feelers out there about what people think about this person writing a book. 10 times out of 10, people are going to be supportive because they want to see you succeed. They're already following you because they already like you on some level. And they're going to be really interested in your journey as you go along in writing the book. And the more little steps you take like that to sort of pull back the curtain on your book writing journey, the more engagement comes along from your audience, and it just starts to snowball from there and gets easier for you as well to start sharing bits and pieces of what you're writing. So that's always the first thing that I tell people when we're starting the market research phase in trying to discover what their audience wants to read about, from you in the first place.
That's amazing. So you're actually kind of starting them on their author platform building journey as well. See who's looking, see what you can build. That's awesome. Who wants to go next? And ladies, you can all, Kristy and Allie, you can unmute.
All right, Kristy, I saw a thought bubble. Did you have something you wanted to that you want? I mean, I have something to say, but like I thought that you had the thought bubble before I did. So if you want to jump in.
You go for it. You know me too well.
Okay. All right. I was thinking about, well, first of all, I love Jessica's strategy here. Like you almost like start that market analysis and engagement interaction like right out of the gate and then find that muscle, right? To be doing that as you go. For me, I like to understand where did the impetus for wanting to write a book actually stem from to begin with, right? So in those initial conversations with prospects or authors that have finally signed and we're moving forward, I really want to understand, well, where did you get the idea that you wanted to write a book? What was the motivation originally? And if it's like, well, I knew that I had all of this data from X number of years in my business serving clients in this way, well, now we're already talking about audience because essentially they're writing a book for other people like their client. Well, then who is their client? And what does that profile or avatar or demographic look like? And then, we narrow it down from there because, if you've been in an industry or a field for 20 plus years, it doesn't necessarily mean that every iota of information that you've learned in 20 plus years goes into that book necessarily, but at least we have a starting point to understand how they're seeing the book and the business connect through the ideal client or audience that they're already serving, right? So I like to start there because often there's some sort of connector between what they're doing for business and what they're intending for the book. And usually somewhere in that middle ground, that connector has something to do with people.
I love that because a lot of times when I get books as a publisher, I will go back with a brand new cover that they brought me and say, why doesn't this connect to your brand? Why are we not using the same colors? Why is this not identifiable? And for people using that brand book to get more business, that's really important. So yeah, I love that a lot. Chris, how about you? And I know you're going to say, yes, do a vomit draft because we don't want everything you just learned in the last 20 years in your book.
I well, if we go back a little further than the vomit draft where they're just starting with me, typically I have to get them focused on who are you talking to. I can't believe how many people try to combine talking to other professionals in their field in their book and also talking to customers or lay people in their book, and it does not work. You have to think in terms of two separate books. So I will say, okay, who do you really want to talk to? What right now, what really excites you about teaching? Do you want to teach to other professionals or do you want to teach to people who would be your clients who, you're teaching them something, and if depending on that determines the languaging in the book because you can use jargon with other professionals that you cannot use with lay people. Think about doctors. Doctors can talk jargon all day, but most of us don't understand all those medical terms, so it wouldn't work. So that kind of thing. We get them really, really focused on who are we talking to, number one, and then what are we teaching them? And no, we're not teaching them everything you've learned over the last 20 years because that'll be a giant tome that nobody will read and it's too difficult. So what I found is when I get them through that process, they start to relax. They go, oh, this isn't as hard as I thought. Maybe I can do this. And they start shifting into, this is, it's more like a manageable thing. So then we can start moving forward into the vomit draft.
Yes, you know what? Diane just made the point. We always want to impress our colleagues. And Chris and I actually started working on a self-published book a while ago where the psychiatrist who was the author did that combination. And so we're trying to get her to separate into the person who's having mental problems or a family member and that professional and putting them in two different books. She made that exact mistake. So that's fantastic that all this gets done. So one of the things that I find as a publisher when I get a book is that none of my authors have their end game. They think they're going to make a whole bunch of money from books, which is very rare that you make. You kind of have to write the book, put out the money and figure that that's a loss leader. Now, what am I going to sell that's bigger? So how do you guys get your authors invested in what's next and get them going on that too? Anybody who wants to take that?
I'm going to jump in here for this one. I think what's really important first is education, because part of the reason that a lot of people who are working on books think that they will write it and they will come, meaning readers and then dollars, is because they don't actually understand the return on investment to begin with. They don't understand how you turn a profit from your book, or what the royalty payments actually break down and look like. Like, they don't get the economics of it, the costs that are associated, how you make that money back, the difference between direct selling and having a distributor sell and push, and all the different nuances and complexities. There's just this like idea that there's something magical that happens when the book lands into the wide internet space or bookstore space or whatever, and then poof, you know, copies are being bought and money's coming in. And I think until they have a better understanding of how this actually works and breaks down mathematically and economically and financially, right, they can't really focus on the end game. They have to have an understanding of all those things first in order to then go, oh, well, if that's how it really works, then, okay, now let's talk strategy, let's talk steps, let's talk, you know, how you get a return. It's not that you can't get a return. It's just a matter of understanding how that return works. But I also think it's a matter of understanding what exactly are your goals and motivators. Is it money driven, or is it something else? Because not all of our end game has to do with the dollar and cents that we're bringing back into our pockets. You know, I think the people who are actually more successful are the people who are like, I'm investing because I want this book to do X, and have it not have anything to do with book sales and sales reports and money generated from a 1-to-1 ratio perspective.
That is so true. And that's one of the things we are very transparent about when we talk to those people. First thing I ask is what are your goals with this book? Because I want to hear, if I have someone say, oh, I just want to make a lot of money, like, you're not my client. Jessica, you want to answer that?
Yes, excuse me. So a few ideas come to mind, but their first one is probably when I work with people now, I tend to attract entrepreneurs because of how I market myself. And what I'm looking for is someone who already has a 4-figure offer in place that is validated, that they have sold before. And I'm usually trying to connect their brand book to that offer by looking at the offer first and reverse engineering the book from that, so that it's all seamless, it's all aligned, it's the same messaging basically, and we're talking to the same person ultimately. Their target client for that offer is also their target reader. It doesn't always work out that perfectly, but usually we can do something there. And sometimes, like you started to allude to this, Allie, in your answer, when someone comes to me and they want to write a book, it's almost like like a self-fulfilling thing, like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an aspirational goal that they have. But then once they start looking into it, like you said, they start to discover all the different investments that you have to do. And again, you can either spend your time doing it yourself, or you can spend your money to have good people like us helping you through the process. So then when I start to drill down and say, okay, if we connect it to a high ticket offer that you already have, things start to make sense, because usually when people go through the trouble of creating and validating a high ticket offer, they like really take it seriously. And I start to say, look, you got to treat your book the exact same way. It can funnel into that high ticket offer, and then you can see a rapid return on investment from that. But when you start to talk like conversion rates in your high ticket offer, and you translate that, like you just superimpose that on the book, then people are like, oh, I see why I'm not going to make money in selling copies. It's like so many readers buy the book, then they read it, and then a certain percentage of those people are then going to like go on to work with me in that specific capacity or whatever other offer that I have set up. So one thing that's a little bit separate from what I just said, though, is that I also seem to attract a lot of people in my audience who want to use the book as a platform for paid speaking gigs, and they can do that very well as well. And I know someone else who helps people attract these gigs. And I remember she said that, like, even as a beginner speaker, you can sometimes get paid around $3,000. So when people start to see something like that, they can like more easily do the math and see an ROI.
Yeah, that's a great point, especially when people have that bigger offer and you can say, look, your ROI is you're going to pay for this package with 3 of those packages or 4 of those packages. It becomes more relevant, but also getting that business above and beyond that is really great too. I love that you do that, Jessica, because most of the people that come to us for publishing do not have courses, and we end up developing courses from the book as well on there. Chris, how about you?
So absolutely on the same page with both Ellie and Jessica. Also, what I have found is that in addition to speaking, a lot of my clients, they want to have workshops or live, they want to do something themselves on a smaller scale than being on a stage. And so many times we try to find a way to make the book either have a companion workbook with it that they can use at a workshop, or some books lend themselves to, here's the information, chapter 1, this is this information, now do these things. Chapter 2, you know, and the book kind of melds. It depends on the topic. It really depends on the topic that they're teaching. But Juliet, we did a couple books like that where it was just right in the book. And then other times I say, let's do a companion workbook. And then you have something to bring, you know, when you bring a workshop together, you're like, you're going to get this book and workbook when you come, and you build that into the price of your workshop. And then you give it to them, and the perceived value of them receiving the book and the workbook and then going through the workshop process is huge, because they get loyalty. They love them. You helped me. I made a transformation. And and I got this book too to help me remember, so I can revisit it and go through it again. And that's what I found, like all those things, like you got to think of ways to expand beyond the book. And it has to be, I would say also, it has to be a way that juices you. Don't try, if you don't want to speak on a stage, don't try to force yourself to do that. Do what makes you feel good, because that's where you're going to bring your life and your joy. Otherwise, you're going to be up there going, yeah, I'm here, but I really don't want to be. And they feel it. So, yeah.
They do. And I think the workbook part, or at least putting questions in your book, is especially important for personal development. Nobody ever had a transformation happen without really digging in and answering questions and looking at their situation. So it is really important for there. And for those of you who are out speaking, my friend Shannon Procease has the best strategy, where when she goes to a speaking event, she puts a book on every single chair, and then she has you open up and you're invested in that book, and you can buy it afterwards. And she rarely walks away with extra books after an event with that sort of strategy, because now people see the value and they're actually opening the book and working and answering questions out of it. So really, really amazing. So I'm going to ask you guys a tough question, and I have to word this just right, because when I threw this at them before, they all looked at me like, what the hell are you trying to say, girl? So how do you get your writer to fulfill the big, juicy promise that they made their readers at the beginning of the book? How'd I do? Okay. Who wants to take that first?
So, I think this is where I'm going to pull in an outline. I think we're going there probably next, but I think that this is important. I think when you outline where you're heading before you actually sit down to write, it's like creating a map to understand that all the chapters and sections of the book are pointing to your North Star, right? So your North Star is that promise that you're making at the outset. Now you want to make sure that each of the chapters that are following are going to speak to the promise that you made. So if we think about the essay that we learned to write in elementary school, right, or middle school, you know, we would start with our introductory paragraph to lay our argument forward, right? And then we would have body paragraphs to support the original thesis that was in the introduction, you know, the setup that we created. And then we would round it all with a nice pretty bow in the conclusion at the other side to prove, hey, we did it. We made our argument clear. A book is basically that format, but in a much bigger way, and some digressions here and there, perhaps, and some creative ways to approach that. But essentially, we're doing the same thing. We're setting up an argument, or we're telling what the promise is at the beginning, and then we've got to support what we've already promised. I find it's easier to do that when we've actually outlined where you're intending to take your concept or your theory or your framework or whatever it is, right? And making sure that each paragraph or each chapter is speaking towards that North Star. And then when you've got that outline created, you've already done the work to know these ideas all connect. They support the thing that you said you were going to do. And then when you sit down to write, you're not fumbling around wondering, does this support that argument? Is this detail really necessary? Not that your outline is necessarily, you know, the end all be all. It's a working and breathing document. And as you get into the application of drafting, it's going to change because the outline is still abstract until you're actually digging in. But the outline still can serve as like one way to get to that final destination, like a GPS. I say the outline is like a GPS. You're putting in kind of where you're trying to get to. The outline gives you one way to get there. And then as you're writing, maybe you end up taking a detour, you find a different way, but like the outline at least gives you a place to start to ensure that you're thinking strategically and intentionally about aligning what you're saying with what you're promising.
You know, I'm going to ask a silly question here. I think Chris does this, but I know I do. Before I start writing, I'm a kinesthetic learner. I actually use cards and like walk over them, shift them around, like, you know what, this will actually belongs here. Do you guys do that before you actually sit down and write the actual outline, or do you do it all on paper, Allie?
I've done it different ways depending on the project and just honestly the energy of the project, or how complex it is. Sometimes if it's super complex, I might need index cards and kind of like tangible items in order to move around and see the various ways that it can go. Other times I'm like, I can see like a clear path and I can map it out on a digital concept board and we're ready to rock. So I think there are different tactics and ways to get to the same point, and it's finding what works for you as the author, as a learner, as a brainstormer, as a visualizer, just how you digest and organize material. There's lots of different tools that you can use. So when I say outline, I'm kind of using that as like, eventually you want it written out for yourself in a way that you can understand it. But how to get to that organized outline that's a document, like the sky's the limit. You know, you could go and write stuff on a pair of underwear and string them up on a clothesline. I don't care if that's like how you're gonna get there. Like, sweet, like have fun with it. I think these are the exploratory stages of writing. It should be fun. It should be exciting. It should be creative. You want to like get those juices flowing so that you've got that kind of initial momentum of it being fun rather than it being a slog.
There we go. And Allie's going to be starting her OnlyFans book outlining course over on on OnlyFans next week with the
outlinesandbriefs.com.
There you go. Oh, who wants to go next?
I would like to, I'm there. Outline is a general broad term, and you can do that outline any way that works for you. I like the color-coded cards because what I can do is I'm more hands-on with my authors. I give them assignments. I'll say like, okay, so we're going to color code, say the stories that you want to include that illustrate your points in blue. And so on blue cards, I want you to make a note like, oh, that story about Bill that day, or just a note to so you know the story. You don't have to write the whole story on the card. You know the story, and then when you lay out the cards, you can go, oh, wait, that story about Bill would be better in chapter 2 than chapter 1. And you can kind of lay them out. But I give them assignments like, I want you to start telling me stories. Like, tell me about your topic. Tell me some stories of your clients, your family, you, anything. Get me, and then we kind of keep a notes, like which stories would fit in there. What could make it flow, because a story will always break up the momentum of the teaching and make it more engaging. And then I have them do like calls to action. I have them do stats if that's applicable to what they're writing. I have them do all kinds of different things. If there's links to something that they need to link to, anything like that, so that they're thinking kind of almost like sectionally. So like they're not having to overwhelm themselves. They always overwhelm themselves with, I have to write a book and it's a big giant thing. It's like, well, right now, you know what I'd really love you to do is just write down your personal journey. That's all you have to do. Don't think about the book. Just tell me how you got here. Tell me your story. Write it down. Send it to me. And we go from there. And then it's like chunking, like I used to do when I was teaching kids. We would chunk something down into a piece, and that's all you had to do right now. And then they relax. And it stops being so overwhelming, because overwhelm equals writer's block. And so that's kind of me, but it's like, I think Alvy does it. I think she said the same thing in different words. And so an outline, one person, I loved mind mapping. I'm not a fan, but it worked for him.
Oh,
So-
yeah, that was our mutual
You know,
client.
You know who it is.
Mind mapped everything to death and never executed.
I
past the
know.
book.
I had to finally say, stop.
Before I know, before we get to Jessica, really quick, because you and I have this discussion all the time. Storytelling, vulnerable versus TMI. For me, that's the whole reason you need a book developer to come in and say, stop already. We don't need to know that particular. So can you address that a little bit?
Oh, yes. Yeah. TMI. I don't censor them on the first draft. I'm like, just write me your story and then send it to me. And then I'll go through it, because inevitably there will be something that is TMI, and they go on and on and on. And then there's another section where it's like they jump over, and that's usually where the pain is.
Right. Yeah.
And
the good
but
stuff.
that's the pain that reaches the audience. So we go through a little process of bringing it out in a safe way, and then they realize that all this stuff at the end that probably could just go away or be way funneled down into one or two sentences. And but yeah, that is a big deal. And honestly, if you're going to write a book, and it doesn't matter if it's fiction or nonfiction, if you're going to write a book, be ready to bare your soul. You know, there is going to be bearing.
Yes.
And if you don't, it just reads dry. And your audience will just drop it and move to the next one.
Yeah,
So-
and many years ago, I worked on a book where we all knew a piece of the woman's story and she left it out. And as her friends, we made her put it back in. When you go look at her reviews, that is the most talked about piece of her book. And she didn't want to do it because it was vulnerable, it was scary, and she was embarrassed by the story. But that was the piece that people really grasp onto. Jessica, how about you?
Yeah, I was gonna tease you, Julia, and ask you, can you just say the question again so I can remember? I'm just kidding. No, I'm kidding. I know it's how do we get the writers, the writers to get the readers the transformation that they're after. And Kristy, you like started to steal my answer there, but I think you went in a little bit different direction. It's all good. I was gonna say storytelling, because since we've got like sort of the teaching and the classroom analogy here, without the storytelling, if you are just regurgitating, your 20-year career, it's going to come off reading like a professor giving a lecture to a class, and like there's no engagement. So obviously, when you're writing a book, you don't have like a live engagement with your readers as they're reading, but we can sort of fake it with the storytelling. And as you also touched on, Juliet, some people they start to freeze up because, like you said, it starts to like get in their feelings a little bit. Feeling vulnerable is an uncomfortable experience as well. And sometimes it's one thing to write it, and then it's another thing to publish it. You sort of like go through the ups and downs and like feelings like, I feel safe about writing it now and including it now in the book. But then as we get along and the book becomes more and more real, now suddenly like I'm putting on the brakes because I'm scared that like this is now going to come out and people are going to know this stuff about me. But as you so rightly said, Juliet, the vulnerability is really important to connect to your readers. So to sum up, it's also very important to know which stories are going to resonate. So your editor, book developer can help you pick and choose and cut the ones that are TMI, they don't make sense, they're not going to connect. I will also add that some of us feel like we can't share what we went through depending on who our book is speaking to. And in that case, I would say if you're like a service provider or entrepreneur or someone who has had client success stories, share those stories in your book because your readers want to know, can you help them with their issue? Have you helped other people like them achieve the same transformation that you're after? So like not all of us have done that for ourselves, but we're still an expert in it because we've helped other people do that. Am I making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's something you guys don't know this, but I worked with somebody about 20 years ago who's a book editor and a ghostwriter. And she told me then she wrote this book. She'd had some domestic violence with a husband in her past. And she didn't want to publish the book then 20 years ago because she didn't want her son to know about it. Well, 20 years, he's old, he's grown now. She still hasn't published that book. So I think sometimes people get so invested in that story that they'll never share it, which is kind of sad. So I want to move to something else here. A lot of people ask me, like, why do I need a book developer? And I personally find that when I get a book as a publisher and you haven't had a book developer, that now you have to do a comprehensive, what you guys call a deep line edit, which you probably would have avoided had you used the book developer. Can you guys speak to that? Because all of you guys do editing. I think Jessica more than the rest of you, but you guys want to speak to that? Because I feel like people waste so much money because they write it first without that guidance.
That's it, Juliet. You answered it. Like, honestly, the only answer is to save time and to save money, to conserve those two resources. Because if you're going out there writing a book, like a lot of people do, you hit the nail on the head. So many people come to me because they've written the book. They have that they think is a pretty finalized, polished first draft. And oh, it just needs a copy edit and a proofread. And I'm like, well, did you think about your target reader? Did you think about the stories? And did you think about what this is funneling into? And then they're like, oh, okay. So there are some like revisions that need to be made. And sort of why not all editors are super loved by our clients. We do make you work a little bit, but it's because we're invested in the success of your book, of course. So that's what I would say are two big ones. I want to conserve time and money as much as my clients do. I don't want to make you go through lots of revisions. Please, please choose to work with me when you get the idea in your head that you want to write a book so that we can start it off right. We can structure it the correct way. And then you can, like Ali was talking about the outline, just follow the outline. And then maybe you will just need a copy edit and proofread. Done.
Yeah, and Chris, sorry, Allie. Chris, you constantly complain about we get books where they write it and then they don't do a darn rewrite, and you can tell.
Oh, you can tell. That's the infamous vomit draft. It's like the first draft is a vomit draft. Get over yourself. It's not a polished, publishable manuscript. And your friend who reads is not an editor. They might be an eagle eye and catch some of your typos, but that's not the same thing. And although I will say, I always like to send a book to a proofer after I'm done, because developers get the same thing that authors get, where our brains start to fill in, we know what's going on, and we miss a lot of typos after we read the manuscript 3, 4, or 5 times. And so proofer at the end who's never seen it is a very good idea, but it's been fully developed. You know that they're just fixing the small things, like a missing period or a double word or something like that. The big stuff is all in place. The big stuff is what sells your book. The big stuff is what resonates with your reader. So yeah, the first draft is not a finished draft.
And you know what I'm going to recommend too, when you take your book to a developer, but then when you get into publishing, I don't think people have any idea how sick of their book they will be by the time it's published. So I highly recommend that when you engage your editor or your book developer, whichever way you're most comfortable with, ask them how much they'll charge to look at the formatted book. Because when I give you your first formatted copy, you're going to look through it and your eye is going to insert what you think is there, whether it's there or not. So get that second set of eyes on the formatted copy. That way you're going to avoid mistakes once it's published as well. Because people don't realize you're going to only get so many revisions in formatting. And when you start to go above and beyond, you're going to get charged for those because there are different points in the publishing journey where, like, to give you an example, if I have submitted and it's approved to Lightning Source, Ingram, whoever we're sending it to, if I have to send it up again, you're going to get charged because I'm going to get charged because you okayed it. So you always have to, I recommend that you go back and ask that person, how much will you charge me to go through this again? I know one editor we worked with, he went through it 9 times. That book was perfect because every format he picked up a little something extra that they didn't get before on it. Allie, how about you?
Well, I definitely echo everything that everyone has said. I think one thing is recognizing that a developer or a developmental editor is the person to help you with the big stuff. And as somebody who might be a first-time author, or it's been a really long time since you've written a long piece of writing, or maybe you've never written a long piece of writing, right? It's a very different thing from writing a LinkedIn post to writing a 45,000 or above book. So just because you might be an okay writer or you might be really skilled in dropping some sweet beats into your LinkedIn posts doesn't necessarily mean that you have the skill, stamina, or strength to, withstand a really cohesive, well-organized, well-developed manuscript on the other side. Like, that is something that we who are here as experts have developed or studied, right, over time. So it is a specific skill set that not most people have. The other thing I think to understand is that one of the most expensive pieces of doing a book is editing. So imagine now, going back to Jessica's point, you've written the whole manuscript and you put it in front of a book developer or developmental editor, and they say, actually, this is garbage. Sorry. You actually need to redo a lot of this. You're talking about a higher rate because developmental editing is the more expensive type of editing, right? And you want to make sure you're working with a good one, right? If you've now you're like, oh, I thought it was ready, so I brought it to a line editor already, or I thought it was ready, so I went and started a contract with a publisher, and I already put all this money down, but now you're realizing that it actually needs a bunch of redevelopment and restructuring that's going to take a lot longer. And it ruins the contract with the publisher, and now you got to extend that, or it means that the money you already paid for the line editor is going to be completely undone because you've got so much rewriting to have happen. You really are now sinking twice as many costs than if you didn't try to go the journey, alone. I also would love for there to be a study. I would love for there to be a study that is like the people who have been working on their book for longer than 2 years. Is it because they've not been working with anyone? Because I feel like the clients who come to me who have already been working on their manuscripts for a really long period of time, they come to me because they've been pushing themselves and slogging through getting that first draft done on their own. And by the time they're done, they're realizing that they're not even sure if it's good anymore because they can't see it any longer. They've got all kinds of blind spots. They intuitively feel like something is off. And then what ends up happening is I see it and I go, did you think about your audience? Did you think about what you wanted to do with it? Did you write an outline? Inevitably, all of those questions go as no, or kind of. And what I'm seeing usually is a mishmash of personal storytelling, some thought leadership. We're mixing genres, and not doing it well. Because there are hybrid books, right? There are hybrid genres, but most people are not coming out of the gate working on a hybrid genre, right? You need to pick a lane. But the people who have kind of done it on their own, right, get all wishy-washy, aren't very clear, and then their manuscripts need all kinds of work. And so now, instead of it taking them 2 years or 10 years, it's now going to take them an additional however many months to years because they made such a mess, unfortunately, of the manuscript to begin with. And that's not to say that it's all useless or the work, isn't informative of the next version or, whatever. It's not that it's all said and done and lost, but like talk about the time and energy investment and having tried to walk that path all on your own, only to come up with something that a professional is going to say, this ain't going to cut it. Sorry. Which are words that I hate to ever have leave my mouth, but I will continue to say them for the benefit of the author. In the long run, having a much better book that they'll be far more proud of, and that readers won't blast all over the internet because they took the time to fix it.
Yeah, I love Diane's comment here. She's read books that are literally like 2 years of blogs thrown together. And I do remember Tracy Hazard and I were going to do a book with sort of an anthology on real estate. And these people had blogs, but we were like, no, we're going to have them rewritten into something that is publishable on there. So too, the other thing about that, Allie, about that 2 year, that's why that vomit draft is so important. I run into people all the time that are like, oh yeah, I'm writing a book. And where are you at on it? Oh, I'm still on chapter 1. And then you ask them how long. They've been rewriting chapter 1 for the last 5 years. And it's like, you know what? You have to get the whole draft out. You can't micromanage that one chapter or it never gets done. Okay, last question here before we open it up for questions. So many people are looking at AI right now and saying, I'm going to write with an AI book. I have yet to see an AI book that isn't crap. What are your thoughts on that?
So I have a funny story. I was writing something that applies to something I was doing, and the AI came back quoting stuff that I had out there myself.
Oh, seriously? So you were the citations on your own work? Oh, that's hilarious.
So
that's what I do love about Perplexity is it does give you the citations versus ChatGPT that just gives you sassy stuff and Gemini that lies and says that Mount Rushmore is full of African-American presidents.
I was just talking with someone about this today because it was a sales call, okay, full disclosure. And I said, I really need to talk to you about AI. And I'm sure you're all sick of hearing it because everyone's sick of talking about it. But I really want to make sure that like my own values are stated up front so that if yours differ, then we know we're not like a good fit to work together. I said, listen, I'm all for automation if there's human touch points. I'm all for making things easier, but I am ideologically opposed to generative AI, and certainly in regards to writing books with it, because as a consumer of books, I'm a reader myself. I love books. When I walk into a bookstore, or heaven forbid, I'm shopping on Amazon for books, I just have an expectation that they're written by humans. I don't really want my selection of books, like in the search results or whatever, in the actual bookstore, to just be written with generative AI. I might be an odd bird, but that's just me. Allie, what do you think?
I think that if an author is going to use AI to author a book, then it's not regenerative AI, it's regurgitative.
Oh, I love that.
Thank you.
Come up with that. Pointing it along with my outlines and briefs side business for outlining. I think, as Jessica pointed out, like AI can be super useful in streamlining things, automating things, brainstorming, perhaps helping maybe with that outline so it's a little more efficient, not so much of a slog. But with a very specific and accurate prompt that is taking into consideration a number of key factors that are you focused in order to make those outlines, brainstorms, whatever, as specific to you and your content and thought leadership as possible. However, none of those things are actually writing the book. If you are prompting an AI source, then you are prompting it, not authoring it. And I think that it calls into question who is actually the author of the piece if you are just putting in your book's prompt into an AI generated piece. Are you really authoring it? Not really. And if AI is pulling from all of the source of data that's out there to pull it in, then it's regurgitating somebody else's stuff, which you now can't cite because you don't have that information, right? And then it calls into question your credibility, your thought leadership, your experience, which an AI can't generate for you. Only you have lived your life. Only you have experienced the things that you've experienced. And if you're using your book to generate leads for your business and people give a crap about what you are able to do for them, an AI can't speak to that. An AI doesn't have the case studies that are in your brain, the client success stories that you have. So no, thank you, folks. Like, you need to actually author the book. That is a verb, which requires action, which means you have to do something. And it's not just like, typing some things in and hitting the button and then letting the thing, pull 80,000 words together, that you then have to really go through and make sure that you're comfortable putting your name on the thing that just got generated from all of the other things out there that aren't actually yours. So I think that there's still a lot of issues with ethics and integrity right now in this space. So I would say, figure out how to use it as personally as you can for all of the outsourcing of other things, maybe helping you generate some ideas, but like, make it yours. Stick with actually having the ownership and authorship of your written word, and just hold up. Let's not get all shiny object syndrome because AI is here to save the day, right? Because what we know about tools and technology, because we saw it with the wave of the internet, is that they are only as helpful and good as the people who are running them. The internet is as much a powerful, wonderful, healthy tool as it is destructive, chaotic, and awful. And it all is about the human on the other side who is pushing the buttons. AI is not any different.
Yeah, that's very true. Now, what AI is good for is running your manuscript through. Are the keywords that you think are your keywords? Is that actually coming out of the other side? We do that a lot. The categories, you can use AI for the categories when you publish. And quite often, we just had somebody change. We ran his book through. It gave us a lot of Christian. And he's like, why is there not psychology? Well, if the AI is picking up that you belong in one area, you have to think about the distributors are using AI to categorize. Amazon runs a lot on AI. If you've ever run an ad, it'll give you suggestions and you look at it and you're like, well, that's not what I intended. So, it is good for verifying that things are there that you think should be there and that you've used them consistently. But yeah, the writing, I don't, and it has no personality.
When you put in somebody's manuscript to do that, I like the idea there. And I've seen somebody do an AI generated report based on their manuscript that provided all kinds of really wonderful, like, here are key points you can talk about in marketing. Here's what it sounds like your audience demographic is. It was really impressive. It was pretty neat. I'll give it credit for that. But when you dump your manuscript into one of these AI generative programs, is it then keeping that manuscript content in its sources?
No, it does
Okay.
not. I
right.
verified with that. And here's the other thing too. If you use something like, so AIs are different. ChatGPT, you're not going to get, you can use it for marketing, but you can't really use it for factual things. Obviously, Gemini proved a couple months ago, you cannot use Gemini for factual. What I love, and I mentioned it with Chris when Chris was talking, is Perplexity. Actually, first of all, it will not take a copywritten manuscript. If you've got a copyright page on there, you've got to do the pre-copyright because it will not look at copywritten material, which I think is ethically a good thing. The second thing is it will give you citations. So you can actually go look and verify that the information you're using is correct and has been verified. So it depends on which AI you're using and what you're doing with it too. But you should never use it to write a book. Like, seriously, the two books that people sent me were just about the worst things ever. And they had no personality. There was just, you have to remember, AI doesn't have a personality. Jessica?
I'm curious, quick question. I don't want to like derail the conversation. Have any of you actually edited a book that was AI generated, like written by AI? Because I would imagine that if you do it that way and you bring it to an editor, it would still cost you more time and more money to get that edited to a place where like now it's okay to publish. Do you know what I mean? Like, had you
Yeah.
just written it yourself, you probably would have saved time and money there again.
Yeah, I think it's the same argument, right? Like if you go it alone, you don't know what you're doing and it's, it's not focused, it's not specific, you end up in a major reconstruction. So, and now if AI has generated it and it doesn't have your voice, it doesn't have your experiences, it's not
Like, it's even
organized according
worse.
to your framework, like whatever it is, right? Like you're still doing the same major reconstruction.
Yeah.
I did have a client who got really frustrated with a chapter. She just could not figure out how to word certain arguments within this chapter. And so she was just frustrated. She had rewritten this one chapter 1,000 times. It always seems like with my clients, there's at least one chapter that gives them hell. And they start to burn out on trying to like figure out how to get that chapter where it needs to be. And what I didn't know is that she took a couple paragraphs and she ran them through AI to write them for her because she just got so burnt out. She didn't share that with me, I think because she knew my feelings on the use of AI in authoring a manuscript. But what happened is when I went to read that chapter again, after she told me that there was another rewrite, I noticed it immediately. It slipped right out of her voice and into like automaton world. And I was like, hey, sent her an audio message. By any chance, did you use AI at all in paragraphs, blah, 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 on page, whatever? And she sent me a message back and she's giggling and she was like, oh, you got me, right? And I was like, this is why I have the opinion that I do, like, because it's obvious. It's obvious, that this isn't you. This isn't at all how you've written up until this point. The tone is different. The expressions are different. The formality of the writing is different. I can't imagine reading like a 75,000 word manuscript.
No.
All generated from AI.
Chris, I have a question for you real quick. You edit my articles sometimes, and you've actually expressed, you can tell the difference between my smart ass tone and what AI generates. So can you talk about that a little bit? And that's just a tiny article. That's not 75,000 words.
Yeah.
Spit out.
Well, I will say typically the AI generated ones require more heavy editing because I have found misspellings, besides the technical errors, I found also malapropism because it's drawing from things that are wrong. So it's like making the word the right word. And a computer doesn't know it's the wrong word if it's been programmed that way, So, but yes, I can tell the difference between when you AI it and when you, and I'll try to beef it up a little and make it more, humanize it a little bit. And I will say I have used AI to bust a writer's block. Like I've got this idea for this chapter. I've got, and I'll put it in and give it some parameters and then get it kind of busts the writer's block. Like, oh, I like the approach there, but then you don't just copy paste it into your manuscript. You have to use your human discernment and go, first of all, you don't even know if it's plagiarized, like Allie was saying. You have to be really, that's a serious thing. And second of all, you got to bring it into your own voice. So it can help you break a writer's block, get an idea for a chapter, help you get a perspective that maybe you didn't think of or you're struggling with, especially if you're really bogged down. That feeling if you're bogged down and you just can't get it. But after that, you have to do heavy editing yourself and make it your own. And for an article, I don't think that's as big of a deal for a 50 to 100 word article as it is for a 50,000 word book.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we're running out of time here. Do you guys have any questions for these guys before we close out? And Diane, I appreciate all your comments along the way here. They've been very helpful. Any? Just unmute yourself and go.
I don't have any specific questions, but it has been amazing to hear from people who are doing this every single day. I do websites, so things tend to be a lot smaller, it's at best your website's 20, 30 pages. Yes, there's still audiences and strategy and marketing and all those kind of things, but I don't have the volume of content, and it's amazing to hear about 70,000 words. And keeping a tone through many chapters, because I'm sure that people who are writing, they are different from the time when they do, what did you call it? Vomit out the first draft.
Vomit
They
draft.
must change. Their emotional state must change fundamentally by the time they've kind of got, they've worked through maybe their own issues, their own stories. And it must be amazing to see that journey that they go through, which will be probably the journey that their reader will go through.
Yeah, that is so true. I think every book is a healing journey. It's almost as if God or the universe, whoever you believe in as your higher power, says, you know what, you've got this, you can do it. And then you get into it and it's like, there's something you're going to have to heal before we finish. That's been my experience with the book is, there's all that thoughtfulness. It's like journaling. You get into some really deep emotion. So it's always very healing to write a book.
Juliet and I had a client we worked with who wrote it was a freaking awesome book. And it was about, she was sex trafficked as a child.
Yes.
And when she handed me the book, she said, just if anything needs fixing, just fix it yourself. Ask me questions, but I'm never reading this book again. She couldn't even read her own manuscript again. But it was so beautifully written that it was very minor, actually, the editing we went through. And then, but it was a huge healing journey for her.
It really, really was. Okay, you guys, before we close out, can each of you tell people where to find you if they would like to embark on this journey in 2025? Jessica, you're unmuted. You want to go first?
Sure. You can find me on LinkedIn. That's where I hang out. On my LinkedIn, you have the link under my name there that will get you on my email list so that you can keep updated with everything that I have going on. I usually send an email out every single week. Lots of exciting things in the pipeline, including how to get an amazing ROI on your brand book, and also a free mini service coming up in January. So I would love it if you would take me up on that offer. So find me on LinkedIn, Jessica Andersen. Andersen is spelled with S-E-N at the end.
Okay. Allie, you want to go ahead since you dropped it in the chat, but nobody can see it?
Oh, we didn't realize that. Okay, well, you can come visit me at therightplacerightTime.com, and that's WRITE in the first place and RIGHT in the second. You can sign up for the email list. And I think all of my social links are also right on the homepage, but the main place that I'm hanging out online really is LinkedIn as well. So would love to connect and chat up. And I give a free 30-minute story stroll, which is just a one-to-one connection call via Zoom or phone, where we just talk about the book that you're wanting to write, the barriers to the blank page, and to try to get you moving again.
That's fantastic. Chris?
Okay, so I'm in the process of changing over. So I don't have a website right at this moment. So the best way to find me is on social media, LinkedIn, Kristy Johnson, or Facebook, same. And Kristy's Kristy. And that's the easiest way to find me, or you can just email me at thenewauthorproject@gmail.com. Just send me an email and tell me you heard me on Juliet's podcast.
That's great. And you guys, I want to remind you, go over and get Breakthrough Author Magazine. You can find it at breakthroughauthormagazine.com. All of these guys write articles. They have great tips, great, perspectives on what's going on. And if you think you know what's going on in the publishing world, you're probably not correct, because it's not as simple as you think it is. It would be like me being, pretending I'm an engineer and building a bridge. I could probably do it, but you wouldn't want to drive across it. So, definitely subscribe and, find out more about this industry. So you have all of the information you need to make this a really great journey. So thank you, you guys. And thank you for you that showed up too.